You're listening to CDKL5 in color. I'm Marissa, and on this podcast, I'm joined by my co host Amanda, and sometimes some very special guests to talk all things CDKL5 deficiency disorder. It's a rare genetic condition caused by changes in the CDKL5 gene. Patients with this condition often experience profound developmental disabilities, difficult to control seizures that start in infancy, cortical visual impairment, and a variety of other health concerns. It's a challenging condition, but we know that by sharing our stories, we can raise awareness, provide support, and paint pictures of our community that can lead to greater understanding and meaningful change for families like ours. Let's jump right in. Hi, Amanda.
Hey, Marissa.
How you doing?
I am enjoying my coffee and I'm excited about our day.
We have a guest today. Today, our guest is Ed Fennell. Ed is a very active grandfather, particularly when it comes to his granddaughter, Haley, who lives with CDKL5 deficiency disorder. He is passionate about communication and believes that our children with CDKL5 and others who are profoundly disabled and nonverbal actually have a lot to say. He is a founding member of Voice for PIMD, PIMD meaning Profound Intellectual Multiple Disabilities. Their mission is to harness cutting-edge AI technologies to enhance the communicative abilities of PIMD-affected individuals. Family support is so important when you're raising a child with CDKL5 deficiency disorder. Not everyone is lucky enough to have family willing or able to help, or even family that's close by. But when you do, it's wonderful to have that support. I know Ava has a good relationship with your mother, Amanda. What's that like?
Ava's favorite person in the world is my mother. She doesn't live very far from us, about 20 miles north on the interstate. So Ava gets to spend a lot of time with her. My mom is my backup caretaker. Even when I was married, if I left for overnights, my mother stayed at my house with my kids. Anytime Ava is inpatient in a hospital setting, if I'm going to go home and get a night at home, it's my mom that's there staying. So
wow. So your mom knows how to do it all. She knows how to do meds. She knows how to
Yep.
do feeding.
Yep. Prepare
Toileting.
food, toileting, bathing. My mom's not much older than me in terms of as you get older in life. She is just kind of wrapping up her own work career and looking to retire. And as she ages into retirement, I'm starting to be a little bit more concerned about the physical aspect of caretaking for Ava and how that will kind of look differently moving forward. My mom will always be involved, but will I have to start pulling another caregiver in to help with bathing and, those kinds of things that really take a lot of, Ava's over 100 pounds, about 5 foot tall. So you really do have your hands full if she's not able to help you physically.
Sure.
So with that being said, going out into the community, oftentimes my mom's the person with us. She's just really part of the core family unit. And Ava actually misbehaves a lot when my mom's around. So as Ava's gotten older, there are times where I don't let mom come with us. Ava does a tremendous amount of observational research. So we spend a lot of time down on Anschutz campus in Denver. And it occurred to me that it was just much harder when my mom came along to get Ava to do what she needed to do. My mom is a sucker for Ava and she gives in. In addition, if we need Ava to attend to something, if my mom's around, a lot of times she's focused on my mom and not the task at hand. So
yeah.
you know,
Is
clinical,
she likes
clinical
to show
EEGs.
off?
She wants to do what she wants to do, and my mom is really good at facilitating that. So maybe she wants to show off, but honestly, it's usually she wants to leave the room. Maybe she wants a snack. In this observational research, we do EEGs, we do motor stuff, and sometimes even assessments where I have to talk with somebody. Ava is really good at getting loud when she does not want me interacting with people around. So, it's just dysfunctional. It's the best way I can say it. Like if I need Ava to do something, I know that we can get it done much quicker in some of these instances when my mom's not around. So anyhow, I'm lucky. I am so blessed. I know many people, like you said, don't have family, don't have backup, don't have help. And I've just been lucky to have my mom. She is one of the only people that helps with Ava outside of school and some of those other natural supports. But nonetheless, she takes a very big role in that. So shout out to the grandparents. And, I think you help, even if it's not every week, when you interact with our children and get to know them. Honestly, it's also just getting to know them and being comfortable. And, my mom still, she doesn't like to see her C's. She's not interested in giving rescue meds. I mean, she would if she had to, but there are things that she would prefer not to do if she doesn't have to.
Sure. Well, it's so
Yeah.
nice to think about like the ways our kids interact differently with different people. I don't have a lot of that experience with Gregory. Gregory's pretty even Steven, no matter who's
With him.
around. I mean, there's certainly in my life with him some very few people that he has not liked for whatever reason. And then there is some distress that he might communicate. I had told a story before about, actually don't think I included it in the episode, but a paraprofessional that he had that wasn't a good fit for him, and he had a lot of seizures, like more seizures than normal.
Because he was
When he was around
stressed.
her, he's stressed out. Yeah. So, but generally he's pretty even with whoever is around. But that's so cool to hear that Ava has it's like a special relationship with her grandma.
Yeah, it is really a special relationship. And and honestly, she and maybe like a lot of other kids, Ava is very independent in some areas of her life when she wants to be. When grandma's around, all bets are off. Grandma will, Ava likes to snuggle, which I mention that because I do think it's important to have a relationship that's not caregiver based, right? So they do have that as well going on. How about Gregory? Does he have a good relationship with his grandparents?
Yeah, well, Gregory has 3 grandparents, so both my parents are still alive, and my husband, his mother, is still alive. My parents live out of state, which is a bummer because they're just not around to be as helpful as I think they would be if they lived close
Yeah.
by. And, like what you're saying about your mom as she ages, you're not necessarily being able to do the physical stuff with Ava. I mean, my parents are already in their 70s, so I would never be expecting them now. Like my mom used to hold Gregory when he was a baby, and even as he was older, she still would hold him. I think she's even held him recently if I put him on
On
her.
her lap, right?
But it's getting to be a bit much. But no, just because they aren't able to do those physical things, I wouldn't leave my parents alone, certainly with Gregory. But as another person who's around, who has eyes open, that's also helpful, right? I've had nurses at my house in the past. If there's been an event or some reason where my husband and I both need to go, we went to a wedding once and had nurses come and stay with Gregory, and my parents came and stayed also. It's peace of mind for me. You trust the nurse to a certain extent, but they're not family, and it's nice to have other family that you
Yeah.
do trust there to keep an eye out, make sure everything's okay, and be another
Just another decision maker, right?
sure,
Because
right, another person observing and thinking, because life can get kind of tricky really fast with our kids, and so if you're having to problem solve, it's better to problem solve with more people than less. So, but Gregory does have a nice relationship with my parents. I wish that they were closer. And then my mother-in-law lives in the same state that we do, probably 40 minutes away, but she tends to be a little bit more
maybe.
cautious. Yes, thank you. That is a good word. Cautious. So whereas my mother, even when I remember when Gregory used to eat orally and we used to spoon feed him purees, and he was a terrible eater. He would have a lot of coughing and it was very stressful feeding him orally. But my mom would always want to feed him. My mother-in-law would never want to feed him. Never want to feed him. She gets nervous, and I don't blame her. I mean, a lot of stuff Gregory does is nerve-wracking. It's anxiety producing. He doesn't hold his head all the time. He's flopping all over the place. He has seizures. And, I think if you don't spend a lot of time with our kids, it's easier to be helpful when you are around more.
Yeah, because you've seen a lot more things happen.
Sure.
Here's the thing. Grandparents really want for their grandchildren probably almost more than for their children. It has to be a really big adjustment that there's not a rule book for any of this or a playbook, but how do you support your children in their parenthood journey when you cannot relate at all? Right? Like no relation, don't understand this. You know what I'm saying? So some of it is just it's so foreign, every aspect of it that, could be
Well,
could
and
be
then
it.
it's layered too, right? I imagine as a grandparent, you're feeling a certain way about what your child is going through, and then you're feeling a certain way about what your grandchild is going through, and that does feel like a lot.
Yeah. And I mean, we had dreams for our children that we had to change. The grandparents, I'm sure, have the same thoughts and, story in their head about, I'm going to do this with my grandchild, or and so I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I hope we have some grandparents who are listening to our podcast. And if any of you listening out there want to come talk about your grandchild who lives with CDKL5, we'd love to hear your perspective
Yeah.
and invite you to come on.
Yeah, maybe you have some great advice for other grandparents that we can't know.
So in our episode today, we hear some awesome stories from Ed about his granddaughter Haley, particularly about how she communicates and takes the world in. She is a spitfire, and Ed has always been her champion and is so passionate about finding a way to bring out her voice so that she is more understood in the world. You're going to hear about the AI technology that Ed is trying to advance, exploring how the skills of engineering students, the knowledge of caregivers, and ever expanding AI technology can develop a system to enhance communication for kids like ours. It is fascinating stuff. And if you have questions for Ed, let us know and we can get you in touch with him. Welcome, Ed.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're so excited. You are our first grandparent guest. This will be cool to see if any grandparents listening decide they want to come on and talk about life with their grandkid. But tell us about Haley, how she's affected by CDKL5 and about the relationship that you guys have, because it's pretty special.
Well, Haley was born January the 4th, 2007. I believe at about 4 weeks old, she had first major seizure. Typical, early onset. Beautiful child, all other respects. However, the seizures were frightening, absolutely frightening. I actually had a day. She was probably only, I don't know, 5, 6 months old. Her mom, Melissa, dropped her off to the house. And we had a good time, breakfast. And I think we did a tubby. Probably 35 minutes after she got there, she had a seizure and never woke up for 4 hours. Woke up, fed her lunch, did some playing. Maybe 40 minutes later, she had another seizure, and she was not awake for the rest of the day. That would almost be a typical day. Seizures were brutal. We struggled for a couple years, and the seizures were unrelenting. And we got the diagnosis. She was a little over 2 years. It came by accident. She was at Boston Children's Hospital getting evaluated for a hemispherectomy, and they started to dig into what is it? Somebody said it was Rett. That was negative. Somebody might have known that CDKL5 was coming alive, and she was tested for that. And it was at that time STK9, atypical Rett. When the diagnosis was transmitted to us, I was with Melissa at Boston Children's Hospital. It wasn't what the doctor said. It was a look on his face. It was basically, man, you're in a lot of trouble. This child won't amount to anything. After the grief wore off, I don't know how many months later was, I said, no. I have taken care of this child 5 days a week plus respite weekends. I know her. She has a lot of cognitive ability. No, she's not talking. She lost all her skills. She got to the point where she was almost cruising at, year 13 months. I got many pictures of that. Standing at a chest, playing, having a good time. Had the ability to pull herself up, from a sitting position at a low windowsill. All of that disappeared, within a couple months. But at the same time, the way the diagnosis was imparted, it was so crushing. After I got rid of the grief, I got angry. So what I did is I took out a half a dozen pictures. Mommy, daddy, grandma, grandpa, cat, and dog. We had a chest. I was able to prop her up in front of me between my knees because she couldn't weight bear. And I spread out probably the pictures anywhere. It's probably about 4 feet from each other. And I would say, which one's mommy? Which one's daddy? Which one's cat? Which one's dog? Which one's Nana? Which one's Poppy? The accuracy was just overwhelming. And I said to myself, what did I prove? I proved A, she could see, B, she could hear, and C, she had at least a 6-word vocabulary, for that particular test. And I knew it was much more extensive than that. I remember one time that we had a speech therapist. This goes on a little bit. She wasn't talking, but she was very engaging. The therapist just loved her. She'd perform, guests in the house that she liked. And there was a toy. It had a mirror. It had like dog-eared tags on it. The speech therapist says, what is this thing? How does it work? Haley slammed her palm down on one of the dog ears, and it played a little, and I remember Jess, the speech therapist, says, I think I was just made fun of that I didn't know. But at any rate, those were the early years, and I can always recall those incidents, and I can recall what I'll call our conversations. I could respond to what she was doing.
I can't believe you were told by that original doctor that. Did he literally say that to you? Haley's not going to amount to anything? Is that what he really said?
No. It was just, man, you got a problem on your hand. It was written all his
Mm,
face. It was nonverbal behavior.
yeah.
Period.
He
End
did,
of the story. I don't know what grade it was, but this probably goes back 4 or 5 years when she had her last, psychological battery. And the conclusion from the psychologist who did it, based on, normative tests, she is less than 1% on all normative scales, period. That probably represents, the classic what we're fighting in terms of, the what is meant by intellectual disability. I probably spent a year and a half going through the literature, pediatric neurology, education, nothing. I mean, there wasn't anything of any substance. And about a year and a half into it, lo and behold, in a IEEE report of a conference in their collection of papers, was somebody who was delving into assistive technologies. And this particular was the Ascension program funded by the European Union to the Poznań Supercomputing Networking Center. Lo and behold, all engineers. I battled the language problem for maybe a month or so, set up a meeting with the principal investigator, a guy by the name of Michal Kosladowski. And I basically said to him one morning on a Zoom meeting, Michal, why did you pick the hardest group that you could ever pick to do this project? And he said to me something quite touching. He said, all creatures communicate, period. And he is the director of all things internet and computer for the Poznań Supercomputing Company. And he decided to delve into health. He was first looking at the elderly who need help, communicating, especially with dementia and Alzheimer's. And then he had a community-wide meeting, and he was approached by a psychologist working with profoundly affected children. And he decided to work on them. And when I got all of his technical reports and I looked at the diagnoses of all the children on there, all of a sudden I realized, wow, these children are profound. There was even a child with Rett on that list. Their basic thesis that nonverbal behavior can be translated. The original system was built to do physiological data, blood pressure, pulse, respiration, oxygen level, and then to read facial expressions and body language. For the children that don't have a lot of body language who are impaired, the people who are in computer vision and facial recognition, they're doing an enormous amount there. That's probably the most productive. Even work with the irises, eye tracking. So that's what it is. It's reading all of the nonverbal communication that we do, and it's pretty much designed to read any kind of nonverbal. The technology needed to do this could be used for anybody deprived of a voice at any time for any reason. What I really liked about it is the Ascension Project took on children that were truly profound and found a distinction between what they call non-symbolic language and symbolic language, which moves on into, literacy. My Haley is a combination of non-symbolic and symbolic, no doubt in my mind. She's got a very extensive vocabulary. She happens to hate her assistive technology, maybe because of calibration. It isn't really custom made for her quickness or whatever. But they started out with recognizing non-symbolic.
all of us, half of our communication is nonverbal. It's what you see. But that does sometimes present a problem when your kids see the world differently with their CVI stuff. I feel no matter where technology goes, it's important that our kids are exposed to literacy, emergent literacy, that we read to them, that we do things when they're young that oftentimes we're not thinking about because life is crazy. Our kids are having seizures. The last thing you're thinking about is reading a dang book to your child. But I think it's all important, like to start to give them that language. Look, there's a stop sign. That might not be where you're at, but you can talk about the dog barking and what the dog's barking at and why the dog's barking or things of that nature. And I want to be sure that we leave this episode thinking about that because all of that stuff is going to make your person much better at picking up any of these technologies that are coming. Is that fair, Ed, do you think?
Yeah, that's very fair. Haley's perceptive of spoken language is very, very good. And she can be a real character when she uses her eye gaze computer. Actually, it'll slay you sometimes. Her aide realized she was uncomfortable with her occupational therapist. Her aide opened the conversation. Haley, I notice you don't like to leave the room with your occupational therapist. Haley was listening intent. And she basically told her she's a nice lady. I know some kids have problems with her, but it's okay. A week later, when the poor woman came through the door to take her to a therapy session, Haley used her talker to say to her aide, help mean get me out of this. And she knew it was funny because when she did it, she laughed and clapped, for her aide, Jess. And probably the most complex one she ever did was, this goes back years when she first had her talker. She would use the word change to mean her diaper was on. Okay? A teacher or a therapist was pushing her on some type of learning program, and Haley was getting angry. Her talker printed and audibly said, eat my change. And then the teacher said to her, Haley Hilt, are you telling me what I think you're telling me? And she laughed at her and clapped and said yes with the talker. But our children are all unique. Let me explain this even better. I was at Notre Dame. I met somebody who was brilliant in terms of AI and large language models. He sat next to me in lunch and dinners probably 3 or 4 times and asked me questions again. I said, why are you asking me all these questions? And he said, because I cannot sharpen my AI tools without knowing what you know in terms of observation. And that's how they build their language models. AI will be able, let me use you for example, all right? We see each other every day in Starbucks, all right? I am there for the purpose of studying people. You come in, let's say for a year. All I'm doing is kind of making notes, checking people out, and I happen to pick on you. You happen to be the best example I see every day. You're consistent. I see your moods. I know what's going on. And I start to make notes. You'd be surprised at the end of a year, an astute observer across the room will have you picked just by watching you. If you're prepared to do that kind of observation, that's it.
So
As
it's like
simple as
a software application that
yeah,
maybe us as a caretaker, we feed it information every day
yes,
about what we observe. And then at some point, this AI gets smart enough that if we're not around, it can take our place in helping people understand and get better at understanding what our children
that's
are
actually
trying
the
to.
goal of this particular project.
Okay. All right.
I'll use the example as follows. I go through, when I put her to bed, I go through a routine. Make sure the diaper is clean, make sure she's got the pajamas she likes, the comforter she likes, maybe a nightlight on, and hit the button on, whatever device is in there to play the Disney music as she goes to sleep. Everything is perfect, the air conditioner, the heat is perfect, everything is perfect, but I forget to hit the button for the stereo. Their end goal was to see, using physiological signals, maybe movements, attitude, it turns it on for her.
Wow.
Or like anxiety, like she's mad because she doesn't hear
Correct.
her music. So it's looking at biofeedback
Biofeedback, yeah.
as well as understanding some of this
Yes.
learned behavior that you're feeding it.
Because one of the things they did, it's not a reach today to think about things like that. Or in the alternate, send a letter to mom or dad,
Mhm.
and somehow a notification, come back and check your child. We noticed this pattern. And that was the original design to actually give the children, let's call it agency. It'll be personalized. That's my goal and objective.
Thanks for listening. We hope you'll follow us on social media at CDKL5 in color on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and visit us online at www.cdkl5incolor.com. Have questions or a topic you'd like us to chat about? Would you like to be a guest on our podcast? Email us, cdkl5incolor@gmail.com, and we'll be in touch. Until next time.